Imagine walking through ancient Rome at the height of its power. Marble temples shine in the sunlight, but the air is thick with sewage, smoke, animal dung, rotting food, and human waste baking under the summer heat. The greatest cities in history were not clean wonders of civilization. They were loud, overcrowded, disease-filled places where every street carried the smell of survival itself. Tonight, we uncover the forgotten reality of ancient urban life, from overflowing drains and deadly rivers to the hidden workers who carried waste through the darkness before dawn. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, then lower the lights and step into the unbearable smell of the ancient world. The smell reaches people long before the city itself appears on the horizon. Travellers moving along dusty roads under the heat of late afternoon first notice a sour thickness in the air, something heavy and damp beneath the familiar sense of earth and wood smoke. Then comes the sharper edge of rot, animal dung drying in the sun, fish scales left too long in market gutters, human waste fermenting in open drains, wet straw, spoiled grain, sweat trapped inside wool clothing, and smoke drifting endlessly from thousands of cooking fires. By the time the walls finally rise into view, the air already feels inhabited. Ancient cities do not smell like ruins, they smell alive. Modern imagination often reconstructs the ancient world in clean stone and silent sunlight. Marble temples stand untouched against blue skies. Broad avenues shine under polished armor and bright banners. Ancient Rome becomes white columns. Ancient Egypt becomes monumental geometry rising from golden sand. Ancient Mesopotamia becomes distant mud brick towers beside slow rivers. Yet none of these cities exist in silence or cleanliness. They are dense biological machines, packed with humans and animals operating within limits that sanitation technology cannot yet overcome. A person entering one of these cities 2,000 years ago steps into an environment where almost every surface leaks odor. Streets absorb urine from both humans and livestock. Rainwater mixes with ash and animal blood before flowing into shallow gutters. Open markets overflow with food that spoils quickly under heat. Fish arrive from rivers or coastlines already beginning to decay. Leather workshops soak hides in chemicals made from fermented urine and dung. Public latrines rarely remain clean for long. Bodies go unwashed for days during shortages of water or fuel. Even expensive perfume serves less as decoration than defense. The ancient city is not dirty because people are ignorant. It is dirty because population density changes human existence faster than infrastructure can adapt. For most of human history, small groups move constantly across landscapes. Waste disappears behind them. Nature absorbs it. Rivers dilute it. Soil buries it. Sunlight dries it. But once thousands of people settle permanently inside walls, the balance breaks. Every meal produces scraps. Every animal produces dung. Every human body produces waste every single day without pause. The city accumulates what the landscape once dispersed. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. At dawn, ancient streets already begin generating smell. Bakers light ovens using charcoal, wood, or dried animal dung. Smoke settles low between buildings. Crowded apartments release chamber pots into alleys below. Donkeys and oxen are driven toward markets, leaving fresh manure in narrow roads where carts crush it into mud. Water carriers splash liquid onto stone pathways already coated with organic residue from previous days. In wealthier districts, servants attempt to clean entrances with buckets and brushes, But the effort rarely extends far beyond individual doorways. Entire cities fight endless battles against accumulation and lose them every morning. The heat makes everything worse. In Mediterranean summers, the sun transforms streets into slow furnaces. Waste left outside ferments rapidly. Standing water breeds insects. Tanneries become almost unbearable. Ancient writers complain constantly about urban odours, though often indirectly. Roman poets mock filthy alleys. Officials issue repeated rules about dumping waste. Philosophers praise country air as morally healthier than city air. What survives in the historical record suggests that smell shapes daily psychological life far more deeply than modern people usually imagine. The noise of the city combines with the smell to create constant sensory pressure. Metalworkers hammer bronze beside crowded housing. Vendors shout over livestock. Dogs search through refuse heaps. Public toilets overflow beside bathhouses. Funeral processions move through busy roads carrying bodies toward cremation grounds or burial sites. Sometimes the dead remain inside homes for days before removal. In poorer districts, multiple families crowd into rooms with little ventilation while cooking fires burn continuously indoors. Smoke stains ceilings black. Moisture clings to walls. Fleas and lice thrive in bedding. And yet millions choose city life anyway. That contradiction reveals something important about ancient civilization itself. Cities are unbearable and irresistible at the same time. They offer trade, food distribution, religion, employment, military protection, political power, entertainment, and social mobility impossible in isolated villages. Ancient urban populations continue growing despite disease, despite fires, despite shortages, and despite the smell because cities create opportunities strong enough to outweigh misery. The stench becomes part of the price of civilization. Some ancient visitors are deeply shocked when they encounter major cities for the first time. Roman satirists describe crowds pressed together so tightly that movement itself becomes exhausting. Chinese historical records mention urban waste problems repeatedly in expanding imperial capitals. Medieval travellers later describe overwhelming smells in markets and harbour districts, from Cairo to Constantinople to Paris. Even in highly organised societies, sanitation systems rarely keep pace with urban growth. The evidence remains incomplete because smell does not fossilise easily. Archaeologists uncover drains, cesspits, garbage layers, parasite eggs, animal bones, and chemical residues, but no excavation can fully recreate the actual sensory force of these environments. Modern cities, despite pollution, operate with hidden sewage systems, treated water, waste removal, refrigeration, ventilation, and industrial cleaning chemicals that separate most people from the constant biological realities surrounding them. Ancient cities possess no such invisible shield. Instead, the body remains in direct contact with urban decay. Feet step over waste daily, hands touch contaminated surfaces constantly. Water must often be carried manually from shared sources. Clothing absorbs smoke and sweat because washing fabric requires labour and fuel many cannot spare. Food preservation remains unreliable. Rats flourish wherever grain is stored. Insects fill slaughterhouses and food markets. Open drains become stagnant during dry weather and overflow during storms. And still, amid all of this, people fall in love, trade goods from distant continents, build libraries, compose poetry, govern empires, and create monuments that survive for thousands of years. That may be the strangest part of all. The ancient city is both magnificent and foul beyond easy comprehension. A wealthy Roman senator walking beneath painted ceilings may pass within meters of open sewage. Egyptian priests burn incense inside sacred temples, while refuse rots outside crowded residential quarters nearby. Mesopotamian merchants conduct business beside canals carrying both drinking water and human waste. Great capitals of the ancient world stand not above filth, but directly inside it. Civilization does not emerge cleanly from history. It rises from mud, smoke, blood, ash, and overcrowded streets where survival itself creates smells impossible to escape. And as cities grow larger, the problem only deepens. Long before stone avenues, public fountains, or monumental gates appear, the first permanent settlements already begin producing a problem human beings have never truly faced before. For hundreds of thousands of years, small bands move constantly across forests, grasslands, rivers, and coastlines. Campsites remain temporary. Waste stays behind and nature absorbs it. Rain dissolves traces. Insects consume scraps. Animals scatter bones. Human groups rarely remain in one location long enough for filth to accumulate beyond control. Then something changes. Around 12,000 years ago, in different parts of the world, some communities begin staying put. Climate stabilizes after the last ice age. Wild grains grow densely in certain regions. Rivers flood predictably. Early farming appears slowly, unevenly, and with many setbacks, but the consequences become enormous. Villages grow larger, storage pits fill with grain, walls rise, animals stay nearby instead of following migratory patterns. Human beings begin surrounding themselves with the physical leftovers of daily life. At first, the smell may not seem overwhelming. A settlement of a few dozen mud brick houses still exists close to open land. Waste can be dumped beyond living areas. Fires burn refuse. Rain washes some material away, but permanence changes the rhythm of accumulation. Every season adds another layer. More people arrive. More animals remain enclosed. More food must be stored. Suddenly the same ground receives years of smoke, ash, dung, food scraps, and human waste without interruption. One of the earliest examples appears at Çatalhöyük, a massive Neolithic settlement occupied roughly 9,000 years ago. Archaeologists uncover tightly packed homes built wall against wall with almost no streets between them. Residents move across rooftops and enter homes through openings in the ceiling. Inside these structures, people cook, sleep, store food, craft tools, and bury their dead beneath the floors. Smoke from indoor hearths fills enclosed spaces daily. Animal pens remain close to human living quarters. Microscopic analysis reveals parasite evidence and long-term smoke exposure in human remains. Scholars still debate exactly how waste disposal functioned there, but no single explanation fully accounts for how such dense living conditions avoided constant contamination. The answer may simply be that they did not avoid it. Early cities do not emerge because sanitation improves. Sanitation becomes a desperate reaction to urban growth already underway. This pattern repeats again and again throughout history. Human populations gather first. Infrastructure struggles afterward. As villages become towns and towns become cities, smell becomes inseparable from survival. Grain storage attracts rodents. Rodents bring fleas and disease. Animal manure piles beside homes because it remains useful as fertilizer or fuel. Water grows vulnerable to contamination because nearby streams serve multiple purposes simultaneously. One section becomes a washing place, another becomes a dumping ground, another becomes a source of drinking water downstream. Ancient people understand parts of the danger even without modern germ theory. They recognize foul water can make people sick. They notice certain places smell deadly during heat or flooding. Religious laws in several ancient societies include sanitation rules governing waste disposal, burial practices, and bodily cleanliness. Yet knowledge alone cannot solve the scale of the problem once populations rise into the thousands. The first true cities in Mesopotamia reveal this transformation clearly. Settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers expand into crowded urban centers surrounded by irrigation canals and farmland. Mud brick architecture traps heat. Streets remain narrow. Domestic animals move constantly through populated areas. Refuse accumulates in alleys until entire street levels gradually rise over centuries from compressed layers of debris and rebuilding. Archaeologists excavating Mesopotamian cities often uncover thick deposits of ash, broken pottery, food waste, and sewage mixed directly into urban soil itself. The city becomes its own geological layer. Ancient inhabitants adapt psychologically in ways difficult for modern people to imagine. Smells that would seem unbearable today become normalized through repetition from childhood onward. Certain odors even gain social meaning. Smoke indicates cooking and warmth. Animal dung signals transport and agriculture. Fish markets smell like commerce. Tanneries smell like labor. The human brain learns to sort these odors not simply as disgusting, but as evidence that urban life functions at all. Even so, complaints survive everywhere. Records from ancient Egypt describe efforts to maintain ritual purity in temple spaces despite surrounding urban realities. Mesopotamian legal texts include penalties related to negligence and public nuisance. Roman authors later joke bitterly about foul apartment buildings and overflowing waste. Across civilizations, people continuously attempt partial solutions. Drainage ditches appear. Certain industries move toward city edges. Wells are protected when possible. Public workers remove garbage in wealthier districts, but ancient cities expand faster than systems meant to control them. Water remains the greatest vulnerability. In early settlements, water sources are often dangerously close to waste disposal areas. Wells can seep contamination. Floods spread sewage across neighborhoods. During dry season, stagnant pools form beside homes. Mosquitoes breed. Parasites spread quietly through entire populations. Ancient skeletons reveal chronic infections, intestinal diseases, and nutritional stress consistent with crowded urban conditions. Children suffer especially. Many die young not from dramatic plagues, but from constant exposure to contaminated environments. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that ancient urban populations frequently required immigration from rural areas simply to maintain numbers. Cities kill people faster than villages for much of early history. Disease, pollution, overcrowding, and poor sanitation create death rates so high that some major cities cannot sustain themselves naturally. Yet people continue arriving because cities also concentrate wealth, power, and opportunity. This contradiction sits at the center of civilization itself. The first cities are engines of innovation built atop unstable biological foundations. Writing emerges, trade networks expand, mathematics advances, temples rise, governments form. But beneath every achievement lies the same daily struggle against waste accumulation. Human beings learn to organize labor, taxation, architecture, and religion long before fully understanding how to separate clean water from sewage. Sometimes the smell becomes unbearable enough to shape urban design directly. Houses cluster around courtyards for ventilation. Streets widen in some planned districts. Wealthier residents move uphill or farther from industrial areas. Elite compounds gain private drainage systems centuries before ordinary people see similar improvements. Already the geography of smell begins dividing social classes. The poor remain closest to rot. In many early settlements, refuse pits overflow beside crowded housing. Families live beside animals because livestock represents survival during famine. Floors become saturated with years of smoke and organic residue. Fleas hide inside woven bedding. Food storage attracts insects. Human waste sometimes dries inside homes before removal because disposal itself requires labour and time. And yet these same settlements create the foundation for every great civilization that follows. The ancient city does not begin as a clean masterpiece slowly corrupted by growth. It begins dirty from the start. The smell is not a side effect of civilization. In many ways, it is one of civilization's oldest signatures. The animals arrive before sunrise. Hooves strike stone streets in uneven rhythms as herders drive goats, sheep, cattle, donkeys, pigs, and geese through narrow gates into waking cities. Dust rises around them. So does the smell. Fresh manure steams in cold morning air. Wet fur carries the odour of mud, sweat, and river water. Chickens shriek from woven cages. Oxen snort beneath heavy carts loaded with grain or timber. In ancient urban life, animals are not distant from people. They live beside them, sleep beside them, work beside them, and die beside them. Modern cities separate livestock from residential space so completely that it becomes difficult to imagine the ancient alternative. Today, most people encounter animals as pets, controlled agricultural products, or distant industrial systems hidden beyond suburbs and highways. Ancient cities operate differently. Animals exist everywhere because urban survival depends on them directly. They transport goods, provide milk, meat, wool, leather, eggs, fertilizer, traction, fuel, and status. Without animals, the city collapses within days. But animals multiply filth at staggering scale. A single horse produces enormous amounts of manure daily. So does a cow. Multiply that across thousands of animals crowded into confined urban districts, and the result becomes almost unimaginable. Streets turn into mixtures of mud, dung, ash, spilled food, and human waste compressed together under constant traffic. During dry weather, the material hardens into dusty layers that wind lifts into the air. During rainstorms, it dissolves into foul slurry flowing through roads and alleyways. Ancient writers mention this reality constantly, though often casually, as if describing weather. Roman streets fill with mule dung. Egyptian markets swarm with flies around livestock pens. Chinese capitals struggle with transport animals clogging crowded roads. In medieval cities, which inherit many ancient urban patterns, pigs roam freely through neighborhoods consuming refuse, but also spreading disease and chaos. What survives in the record suggests that animal management remains one of the greatest unsolved problems of pre-modern urban life. The smell alone reshapes daily behavior. People learn which streets to avoid during heat. Wealthier residents pay servants to clean entrances repeatedly. Sand or straw is scattered over especially foul areas to absorb moisture and odor temporarily. Perfumes become valuable, partly because the surrounding environment constantly assaults the senses. Even religious rituals often involve aromatic smoke, perhaps not only for symbolism, but also because incense masks nearby biological smells. Inside homes, the boundary between humans and animals remains surprisingly thin. In poorer districts, livestock may sleep on lower floors while families occupy upper rooms. Goats shelter inside courtyards. Chickens wander through kitchens. Donkeys remain tied beside living spaces overnight to prevent theft. Archaeological excavations repeatedly uncover animal bones, dung residues, parasite eggs, and feeding troughs embedded directly within residential zones. This intimacy carries consequences beyond smell. Animals become powerful disease carriers inside ancient cities. Rats consume stored grain and breed inside walls. Fleas spread infections between species. Flies move constantly between manure, food, and human bodies. Pigs rooting through refuse ingest contaminants and redistribute them elsewhere. Dogs feed on garbage heaps and carcasses. Water sources become vulnerable whenever livestock gather nearby. Ancient people understand parts of this danger intuitively even without scientific explanation. Certain animals gain reputations for impurity. Some urban regulations attempt to restrict slaughter or herding in specific districts, but enforcement rarely matches population pressure. The city is simply too crowded. In places like ancient Pompeii, volcanic ash preserves evidence of how closely animals and humans coexist. Archaeologists uncover tethering rings beside homes, stable areas inside urban compounds, and worn pathways from carts and hooves cutting across stone streets. Fossilized manure remains trapped in drains. Even elegant villas exist within a larger urban ecosystem saturated with animal presence. The wealthy can distance themselves somewhat, but never completely. Elite Romans may own spacious houses with internal courtyards and fountains, yet outside their walls pack animals still haul cargo through the streets. Nearby bakeries grind grain using donkey-powered mills. Public markets slaughter livestock daily. Smoke from cooking fires drifts everywhere. Open drains carry runoff mixed with dung and waste. No district escapes entirely. Some ancient cities attempt ambitious solutions. Roman engineers build stone-paved roads with raised sidewalks partly to lift pedestrians above filthy street surfaces. Stepping stones allow people to cross roads without wading directly through muck. Drainage systems remove some runoff, yet even these innovations cannot eliminate the underlying problem. Animals remain too necessary. Horses and donkeys especially dominate transport economies. Before engines exist, nearly every heavy object entering or leaving a city depends on animal muscle. Construction materials, food shipments, military supplies, water containers, market goods, and human passengers all require beasts of burden. Ancient urban economies run literally on dung-producing bodies, and when animals die, another problem begins. Dead livestock cannot remain inside crowded cities for long. Carcasses rot rapidly in warm climates. The smell becomes overwhelming. Scavengers gather. Disease risk increases. Disposal methods vary across cultures and periods. Some carcasses are butchered immediately if usable. Others are dragged beyond city limits into dumping grounds. Archaeologists sometimes uncover enormous bone deposits near ancient urban centres, evidence of centuries of slaughter and disposal operations. Yet not all waste is considered useless. Dung itself becomes economically valuable. Farmers outside city walls purchase manure for fertilizer. Dried dung serves as fuel in regions lacking wood. Some industries even rely on urine and animal waste for chemical processing. Tanneries soften hides using mixtures involving dung and fermented liquids. Textile workers clean fabrics with ammonia-rich substances collected from human and animal urine. Ancient economies recycle biological material constantly because resources remain scarce. This recycling reduces some waste while intensifying certain smells dramatically. Tanneries become infamous across civilizations for their unbearable stench. Rotting flesh must be removed from hides. Chemicals soak leather for days. Workers stand ankle-deep in foul mixtures under intense heat. These industries are usually pushed towards city edges or downstream areas when possible, though prevailing winds still carry odours across large distances. Ancient legal codes occasionally attempt to regulate such workshops, evidence that public complaints become impossible to ignore. Scholars still debate how psychologically adapted ancient populations become to these environments. Did ordinary people simply stop noticing the smells, or did they endure constant low-level sensory stress? Modern societies have largely forgotten. The evidence remains incomplete. Human beings can normalize extraordinary conditions over time, yet ancient literature repeatedly returns to themes of foul air, urban corruption, and longing for cleaner rural life. Perhaps the smell never truly disappears from awareness. Perhaps every city dweller carries it constantly in clothing, hair, and memory. The odour of animals mixing with humanity until both become inseparable parts of civilization itself. Because beneath the marble temples, crowded markets, and imperial monuments, ancient cities are still ecosystems made of living bodies, human bodies, animal bodies, breathing, sweating, bleeding, defecating bodies packed together inside walls never designed to contain so much life. Water enters the city clean only briefly. At its source, a river may run cold from mountain snow or underground springs untouched by settlement. Canals may begin as clear channels cut carefully through fertile earth. Wells may first draw fresh groundwater, filtered through layers of sand and stone. But once water passes through dense urban life, it changes. Slowly at first, then completely. Ancient cities depend on water more than any other resource. Without constant access to rivers, aqueducts, wells, or reservoirs, large populations cannot survive. Water cooks food, washes bodies, cools streets, irrigates crops, powers industries, mixes mortar, extinguishes fires, and sustains animals crowded within walls. Yet the same water system that keeps cities alive also becomes their greatest weakness. In nearly every ancient civilization, the line between drinking water and sewage remains dangerously thin. In Mesopotamia, entire urban worlds rise between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Irrigation canals spread across dry plains, transforming harsh landscapes into agricultural centres capable of feeding enormous populations. Cities like Ur and Babylon depend on carefully managed waterways, but canals do not carry only irrigation water. Over time they receive runoff from streets, animal pens, workshops, and waste disposal areas. Sediment accumulates. Stagnant pools form during floods. Sewage and refuse spread widely through residential districts. The rivers themselves become crowded with conflicting human needs. One section may serve as a source of drinking water, while another becomes a place for washing clothes, cleaning animals, processing leather, or dumping waste. Upstream contamination drifts toward downstream populations. During droughts, shrinking water levels concentrate pollution further. Ancient administrators understand pieces of the problem. Laws regulate irrigation access. Workers dredge canals repeatedly. Priests perform purification rituals connected to water sources. Yet no system fully separates clean and dirty water on the scale cities require. The consequences spread invisibly. Modern people often associate ancient disease with dramatic epidemics, but ordinary contaminated water may kill more consistently than plague. Dysentery, parasites, intestinal infections, and chronic gastrointestinal illnesses move quietly through urban populations year after year. Children suffer constant exposure. Malnutrition weakens immune systems. Open drains breed insects. Wells become contaminated by nearby cesspits. What survives in the archaeological record suggests many ancient urban residents live with recurring illness as part of normal existence. The smell becomes a warning sign people partly trust and partly misunderstand. For much of history, foul odours are believed to carry sickness themselves. The idea later becomes known as miasma theory, though versions of it appear across many cultures long before formal scientific language develops. Rotting water smells dangerous because dangerous places often do smell rotten. Swamps, stagnant canals, refuse heaps, and sewage pits correlate with disease outbreaks often enough that the association seems obvious. The explanation is incomplete, but not entirely wrong. Bad smells do not cause illness directly, yet the environments producing them frequently contain deadly pathogens. Ancient cities therefore fight a strange sensory war. Sweet-smelling water represents safety. Stagnant odour means danger. In ancient Rome, aqueducts eventually bring enormous quantities of fresh water into the city, one of the great engineering achievements of the ancient world. Public fountains flow continuously. Bathhouses operate at astonishing scale. Wealthy households access private water supplies. Yet beneath this achievement lies a more complicated reality. Roman drains and sewers remove significant waste, but they do not create modern sanitation. The famous Cloaca Maxima carries runoff and sewage toward the Tiber River, which downstream populations still use extensively. Flooding repeatedly pushes contaminated water back into urban areas. Public latrines remain crowded and often poorly ventilated. Water infrastructure improves conditions enormously compared to many earlier cities, but the smell never disappears. Even bathhouses contribute to the problem. Roman baths symbolize cleanliness in modern imagination, yet maintaining them requires immense fuel, labor, and water circulation. Crowds sweat together in heated rooms. Oils, dirt, and bodily residue accumulate constantly. Pools must be drained and refreshed repeatedly to remain usable. Scholars still debate how hygienic some bath complexes truly are during peak use. The evidence remains incomplete, but ancient complaints about overcrowding and unpleasant conditions survive in scattered writings. Farther east, large cities in ancient China also struggle with urban water management. Expanding populations strain canals and drainage systems. Flood control becomes a matter not only of agriculture but survival inside crowded capitals. Waste disposal workers operate near waterways continuously. Some dynasties invest heavily in hydraulic engineering, dredging operations, and urban planning, yet rapid growth repeatedly overwhelms infrastructure. Rain transforms everything again. During dry weather, waste accumulates visibly in streets and drains. Then storms arrive suddenly. Water rushes through alleys carrying manure, garbage, ashes, dead animals, and human waste together into canals or low-lying neighborhoods. Floodwaters spread contamination rapidly. Wells overflow. Buildings weaken. Mud brick structures partially dissolve under repeated moisture exposure. In tropical or subtropical regions, the heat afterward accelerates decay even further. Some ancient cities develop surprisingly advanced drainage systems in response. The cities of the Indus Valley civilization contain evidence of organized street drains, bathing platforms, and planned water management that appear remarkably sophisticated for their time. Archaeologists studying sites like Mohenjo-daro continue debating how effectively these systems functioned across entire populations, but they clearly reflect serious attempts to control urban sanitation. Even here, however, no ancient system fully escapes biological reality. Waste still exists, water still stagnates, flooding still threatens contamination. The deeper problem remains scale. A small village can survive with shared wells and nearby streams. A city of 50,000 people cannot rely on the same methods without consequences. Every additional resident increases pressure on water systems already vulnerable to contamination. Livestock multiply the strain further. Industries dump byproducts into canals. Corpses enter rivers during epidemics or disasters. Ships crowd harbours with human and animal waste accumulating near shorelines. Harbour cities become especially infamous for smell. Fish markets rot under heat. Tidal zones trap sewage and refuse against docks. Stagnant harbour water darkens with pollution. Ancient visitors describe certain port districts as nearly unbearable during summer months. Yet trade continues because economic necessity outweighs discomfort. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient urban populations tolerate these conditions for centuries. Adaptation plays a role. Social hierarchy allows elites partial escape. Constant exposure reshapes expectations. But another truth also emerges quietly from the evidence. For most ancient people, truly clean water is not normal. It is precious, temporary, and often uncertain. Every cup carries invisible risk. Every canal balances survival against contamination. And beneath the monumental architecture of the ancient world, rivers continue flowing slowly through cities that poison them a little more each year. The market announces itself through smell before anything else. Long before buyers see awnings or hear merchants shouting prices, the air changes. Salt fish drying beneath the sun release a sharp metallic odour that mixes with blood from fresh slaughter. Crushed herbs briefly sweeten the atmosphere before disappearing beneath heavier scents of dung, sweat, smoke, rotting vegetables, wet wool, and fermenting grain. Flies drift in dark clouds over butcher stalls. Dogs circle beneath tables waiting for scraps. In crowded harbour cities, the smell of the sea merges with human congestion, until the entire district feels thick enough to taste. Ancient markets are not tidy places of colourful trade arranged neatly for visitors. They are dense biological centres where life and decay operate side by side every hour of the day. The city depends on these spaces completely. Food must move constantly through urban populations because ancient preservation methods remain limited. Grain can store for long periods if kept dry, but meat spoils rapidly. Fish deteriorates almost immediately under heat, unless salted or smoked. Fruits collapse into fermentation. Milk turns sour. Vegetables rot in piles when transport slows or temperatures rise. Ancient merchants therefore operate within relentless urgency. Goods arriving at dawn may become dangerous by evening. This urgency shapes the smell of civilization itself. In cities like Alexandria, enormous quantities of food arrive daily by ship, cart, and animal caravan. Fish markets near the harbour process catches directly beside crowded streets. Slaughterhouses operate continuously to supply growing populations. Animal blood runs through gutters mixed with wash water and offal. Workers strip hides from carcasses while nearby vendors sell bread, wine, oil, spices, and cooked food to passing crowds. The boundaries between edible and rotten remain dangerously narrow. Ancient people understand spoilage through experience rather than microbiology. Smell becomes one of the most important survival tools in urban life. Sour odours warn of danger. Sweet decay signals contamination. Smoke can preserve food temporarily. Salt slows rot but cannot stop it forever. Market workers constantly inspect goods with hands, eyes, and noses because a single failed shipment may spread illness quickly. Still, outbreaks happen constantly. Archaeological evidence and surviving texts suggest food poisoning, parasites, and intestinal disease remain common features of ancient urban existence. Street food especially carries risk. Vendors prepare meals near open drains, contaminated water sources, or swarming insects. Meat hangs exposed in warm air. Fish may travel long distances without refrigeration. Yet people continue buying because cities leave few alternatives. Most urban residents lack private farmland or storage capacity. They depend entirely on market systems functioning day after day without collapse. The smell of blood becomes especially powerful near slaughter districts. Ancient slaughterhouses are loud, violent, and deeply physical places. Animals arrive frightened and exhausted after transport through crowded streets. Workers kill, butcher, clean, and process carcasses at astonishing speed to meet urban demand. Fresh blood mixes with manure already coating the ground from holding pens, intestines, bones, hides, fat, and unusable remains accumulate rapidly. Water used for cleaning often drains directly into nearby channels or streets. During hot weather, the odour becomes overwhelming. Roman authorities sometimes attempt to place slaughter operations near city edges or downstream areas, but expanding populations repeatedly swallow these boundaries. Similar patterns appear across the ancient world. Industrial smells migrate toward poorer districts while wealthier neighbourhoods seek distance whenever possible. Yet complete separation proves impossible because cities depend economically on these industries remaining close. Tanneries become even worse. Leather production is essential for ancient societies. Armies require sandals, belts, armour fittings, shields, harnesses, tents, and countless other leather goods. Civilians need shoes, bags, straps, containers, and tools. But transforming animal hides into usable leather creates one of the foulest industries in pre-modern history. Fresh hides begin decomposing immediately after slaughter. Workers must remove flesh and hair quickly before rot destroys the material completely. To loosen hair, hides soak in vats filled with alkaline substances, often including urine, lime, and dung. Workers then scrape surfaces repeatedly by hand. The smell combines decay, chemicals, excrement, and wet animal tissue under intense heat. Ancient writers mention tanneries with near-universal disgust. In some cities, laws push these workshops beyond central districts because residents complain relentlessly. Yet prevailing winds still carry the odour for considerable distances. Archaeologists identify tannery sites today, partly through chemical residues left in soil after centuries of industrial processing. The fish trade creates its own sensory landscape. Along Mediterranean coasts and major rivers, fish markets operate under constant pressure against time. Fresh catches arrive packed in salt or seaweed, but begin deteriorating quickly once unloaded. Ancient sources like garum, prized throughout the Roman world, are produced by fermenting fish parts inside large containers under the sun. The resulting liquid becomes enormously valuable as seasoning. Yet the production process generates a smell many modern people would find unbearable. Entire districts become associated with specific odours. Visitors navigating ancient cities likely orient themselves partly through smell as much as sight. Incense marks temples. Smoke and bread identify bakeries. Wet wool and chemicals reveal dye workshops. Blood and rot signal slaughter areas. Sewage warns of low ground and crowded housing. Markets combine all of them into shifting layers depending on weather, wind, and time of day. The poor experience these conditions most intensely. Wealthier citizens can purchase fresher food, employ servants to shop early, and avoid lingering near industrial districts. The urban poor often live directly beside markets and workshops, because rent is cheaper there. Families sleep above butcher stalls or beside narrow alleys filled with refuse. Rats feed freely on discarded scraps. Insects swarm through open windows during summer nights. And still the markets fascinate people endlessly. Trade creates excitement powerful enough to outweigh discomfort. Exotic spices arrive from distant continents. Foreign merchants bring strange fabrics, perfumes, and stories. Crowds gather around rare animals or unusual foods. Public life concentrates inside these noisy, filthy, commercial centres because they represent the beating economic heart of the city. This contradiction appears again and again throughout ancient urban history. The places generating the worst smells are often the places generating the greatest wealth. No single explanation fully accounts for how people emotionally processed these environments. Ancient individuals likely feel disgust, adaptation, pride, exhaustion, and dependence simultaneously. Markets are repulsive and necessary at the same time. By sunset, the smell deepens further. Heat lingers between buildings. Unsold fish begin collapsing into decay. Blood dries black across stone surfaces. Workers dump spoiled vegetables into refuse piles already alive with insects. Dogs fight over discarded bones. Drains clog with organic waste. Smoke from evening cooking fires settles low across crowded districts. Then darkness arrives, and the city prepares to do it all again the next morning. To later generations, Rome becomes the city that solves civilization. Its aqueducts still stand across valleys in broken lines of stone. Its roads stretch across continents. Its amphitheatres survive earthquakes and centuries of abandonment. Roman engineers drain marshes, redirect rivers, construct public baths, pave streets, and build sewer systems so ambitious that parts remain functional long after the empire itself disappears. Modern imagination therefore often treats Rome as the moment ancient urban life finally became clean and organized. But the smell tells a different story. Ancient Rome is not a polished marble capital rising above filth. It is a crowded organism of perhaps 1 million people at its height, compressed into a landscape of apartment blocks, workshops, taverns, bathhouses, markets, temples, animals, smoke, and constant waste. Roman engineering improves urban life dramatically compared to many earlier cities, yet infrastructure alone cannot overcome the biological realities of such enormous population density. The contradiction exists everywhere. Fresh water pours continuously from aqueduct-fed fountains, while nearby drains overflow during storms. Public latrines operate beneath magnificent architecture, yet remain foul enough that writers joke bitterly about them. Wealthy elites dine in decorated villas, while outside their walls carts splash through streets layered with manure and refuse. Rome creates the illusion of cleanliness because it masters movement, moving water, moving goods, moving waste, moving people. But movement is not elimination. The city still smells alive. At dawn, workers sweep portions of major roads, though much of the debris simply relocates elsewhere. Chamber pots emptied from upper-story apartments spill into streets, despite regulations against doing so. Ancient satirists complain about pedestrians being struck by falling waste at night. The danger is so common that some writers advise wealthy men to update their wills before walking beneath apartment windows after dark. Much of Rome lives vertically. Multi-story apartment buildings called insulae crowd poorer districts. Families squeeze into rented rooms with limited ventilation and little direct water access. Wealthier tenants occupy lower levels. The poor climb steep stairs to cramped upper floors where heat, smoke, and smells accumulate intensely. Fires break out regularly because cooking happens inside densely packed wooden structures. Water remains accessible in theory but uneven in practice. Rome's aqueduct system is astonishing for the ancient world. By some estimates, hundreds of millions of litres of water enter the city daily during the imperial peak. Public fountains operate constantly. Baths flourish. Some elite homes contain private plumbing, yet ordinary residents often rely on shared fountains or water carriers. Many apartments lack direct sanitation entirely. Waste still moves manually through much of the city. The famous Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, becomes legendary in later centuries. Originally constructed to drain marshland, it evolves into part of a broader drainage network carrying stormwater and sewage toward the Tiber River. Roman achievement here is real. Many ancient cities never develop comparable infrastructure, but the sewer does not create modern hygiene. It mainly prevents total stagnation. The Tiber itself becomes increasingly polluted. Industrial runoff, human waste, animal remains, and urban debris flow downstream continuously. Floods periodically reverse the process, pushing contaminated water and sewage back into streets and buildings. Ancient Rome suffers repeated flooding events that spread mud, refuse, corpses, and waste through densely populated districts. After floodwaters retreat, layers of filth remain behind under Mediterranean heat. The smell after flooding must have been extraordinary. Roman writers rarely describe it directly in full detail, perhaps because daily familiarity makes exhaustive description unnecessary. Yet scattered references survive. Complaints about foul neighborhoods, unhealthy air, overcrowding, and unbearable heat appear repeatedly across Roman literature. Elite authors romanticize rural villas partly because countryside air feels cleaner and healthier than urban life. Even the bathhouses, symbols of Roman sophistication, reveal deeper contradictions. Public baths are social centers where thousands gather daily to wash, exercise, conduct business, and relax. Heated rooms glow with steam. Pools shimmer beneath vaulted ceilings. Oils and perfumes mask bodily odors temporarily. To outsiders, this appears remarkably modern. Yet maintaining such complexes demands constant labor and fuel consumption. Water circulation varies greatly. Crowds pack tightly together. Floors become slippery with sweat and residue. Shared tools scrape dirt and oil from bodies before being reused repeatedly. Scholars still debate how sanitary some bath complexes truly are during peak operation. Parasites likely spread easily in crowded, warm environments. The evidence remains incomplete, though archaeological studies of ancient latrines and waste systems reveal intestinal infections remained widespread, even in highly organized Roman cities. The public latrines themselves expose the strange mixture of practicality and discomfort shaping Roman life. Rows of stone seats line communal toilets where strangers sit side by side without privacy. Water channels beneath remove waste continuously when functioning properly. Shared sponges attached to sticks serve cleaning purposes. Ventilation remains poor in many facilities. The smell combines sewage, humidity, human bodies, and stagnant runoff. Yet Romans treat these spaces as ordinary social environments, where conversation and business may continue casually. Modern discomfort with this arrangement says as much about modern expectations as ancient conditions. Rome normalizes intimacy with waste because total separation is impossible. Even elite households rely on enslaved laborers to clean latrines, empty containers, and manage domestic sanitation manually. Thousands of workers spend their lives moving garbage, animal carcasses, and sewage through the city. Without constant labour, the capital would drown beneath its own biological output within days. Animals intensify everything further. Donkeys haul cargo through streets from dawn until nightfall. Horses transport officials and goods. Cattle move towards slaughterhouses. Mules power mills and carry construction materials. Manure accumulates faster than removal systems can handle. Stepping stones placed across roads help pedestrians avoid the worst mud and filth, but they also reveal how normalized street contamination becomes. Certain neighborhoods develop notorious reputations. Industrial districts containing dye works, metal workshops, and tanneries produce overwhelming odors under summer heat. Harbor areas near warehouses attract rats and insects in massive numbers. Poor housing districts trap smoke between narrow alleys where sunlight barely reaches the ground. Funeral pyres outside city walls contribute another layer of smell drifting inward under shifting winds. And yet Rome astonishes visitors constantly. The city feels powerful precisely because it functions despite impossible scale. Grain shipments feed enormous populations. Water systems operate across vast distances. Markets overflow with imported luxuries from Africa, Asia, and Europe. Public architecture inspires awe. Rome creates an image of order strong enough to hide the fragile reality underneath. But the illusion never fully holds. Behind every fountain stands a polluted river. Behind every marble facade lies overcrowded housing. Behind every engineering triumph waits another mountain of waste. Rome does not conquer smell. It merely manages it better than many cities before it. And for centuries that is enough to make it seem almost miraculous. Every morning before most cities fully awaken, another workforce is already moving through the streets. They carry buckets, barrels, carts, baskets, and poles balanced across their shoulders. Some work quietly before sunrise to avoid attention. Others move openly through crowded districts because everyone depends on them whether they admit it or not. Their labour deals with the one substance civilization produces endlessly and wishes not to see. Human waste becomes an economy. Ancient cities cannot survive without constant removal of excrement from homes, streets, public toilets, military barracks, workshops, inns, and marketplaces. The larger the population grows, the more urgent the problem becomes. Yet sewage systems remain incomplete or entirely absent across much of the ancient world. Even in advanced urban centres, waste often requires human beings to transport it manually through crowded neighbourhoods every single day. The smell follows them everywhere. In later centuries, many Asian cities develop organised systems for collecting night soil, the term used for human waste gathered from urban households and sold as fertiliser to nearby farmers. But the practice itself is far older than the phrase. Ancient societies across the world recognise that waste possesses agricultural value. Crops deplete soil. Cities produce enormous quantities of nutrients. Someone eventually realises excrement can move from urban cesspits back onto farmland. This discovery solves one problem while creating another. The workers handling waste occupy strange positions inside ancient society. Their labour is essential but deeply stigmatised. Wealthy residents depend on them completely while avoiding physical proximity whenever possible. Ancient legal texts and social customs often place sanitation workers near the bottom of social hierarchies. Some are enslaved. Others belong to hereditary occupations associated permanently with impurity. In certain cultures, even touching the tools used for waste removal carries social consequences. Yet without these workers, cities collapse rapidly into catastrophe. In dense neighbourhoods lacking underground sewage, chamber pots fill throughout the night. Families store waste temporarily inside cramped homes until collection or disposal becomes possible. Public latrines overflow if not cleaned constantly. Inns and apartment buildings generate astonishing amounts of biological refuse every day. During heat waves, the smell intensifies rapidly enough to become physically oppressive. Ancient sanitation labour therefore operates under relentless pressure. In some cities, workers empty cesspits manually using buckets lowered into underground chambers thick with toxic gases. Historical records from later periods describe workers suffocating inside confined waste pits from methane and other fumes. Scholars suspect similar dangers existed much earlier, though direct evidence remains limited. The work is exhausting, dangerous, and omnipresent, and the city rarely notices unless the system fails. Roman sanitation offers one example of this hidden dependence. Though famous for aqueducts and drains, much of Rome still relies on manual waste management at street level. Public latrines require maintenance. Private homes often discharge waste into cesspits or nearby drains. Streets accumulate manure and refuse faster than runoff can remove it. Workers sweep roads, haul debris, clear blockages, and transport waste continuously. The labour remains largely invisible in elite literature except during moments of complaint or mockery. This silence itself reveals something important. Ancient civilizations celebrate emperors, generals, priests, and architects because monumental achievements symbolize power. The workers preventing cities from drowning in excrement receive little glory. Yet their labour may be more essential to daily survival than many celebrated political victories. Some waste even becomes valuable enough to tax. In ancient Rome, urine is collected for industrial use because ammonia helps clean fabrics and process leather. Public urinals feed into collection systems supplying workshops. The Emperor Vespasian famously imposes a tax connected to urine collection, later inspiring the phrase "money does not stink." The story survives partly because it captures a central truth of urban civilization. Cities learn to profit from substances individuals prefer not to think about. Tanneries, laundries, and dye workshops rely heavily on these recycled materials. Workers known as fullers clean clothing using mixtures involving urine and water. Garments are stomped underfoot inside vats to remove oils and dirt. The smell inside such workshops must have been extraordinary, especially during summer heat. Yet clean fabric remains socially important enough that entire industries evolve around these unpleasant chemical processes. Outside the formal economy, informal disposal continues everywhere. People dump waste into alleys, rivers, abandoned lots, or open drains whenever collection systems fail or fees become burdensome. Archaeologists excavating ancient cities repeatedly uncover layers of garbage tossed into streets before later paving or rebuilding covers the evidence. Broken pottery, food scraps, ash, dung, sewage residue, and household waste accumulate together in compressed urban strata meters deep. Civilization literally builds itself atop garbage. In poorer districts, conditions become especially severe. Crowded housing lacks proper drainage. Shared latrines serve enormous populations. Overflow during storms spreads contamination directly into homes. Flies breed rapidly. Children play beside refuse heaps because open space barely exists elsewhere. What survives in the archaeological and historical record suggests chronic exposure to waste shapes everyday health constantly. And yet attitudes toward cleanliness vary in complicated ways. Ancient people are not indifferent to hygiene. Many societies value bathing, ritual purification, clean clothing, and orderly households intensely. Religious traditions frequently include washing practices connected to both physical and spiritual cleanliness. Roman bath culture flourishes. Egyptian elites used scented oils and cosmetics extensively. In parts of ancient India and East Asia, detailed sanitation customs emerge around water and bodily purification. But personal cleanliness and urban sanitation are not the same thing. An individual may bathe regularly while still walking through contaminated streets daily. A wealthy household may smell of incense indoors while sewage stagnates nearby outside. Ancient cities create pockets of order surrounded by larger systems struggling against scale and accumulation. Scholars still debate how ordinary urban residents emotionally processed these contradictions. Did they feel constant disgust? Did familiarity dull sensory reaction over time? The evidence remains incomplete. Human beings adapt remarkably to environmental conditions when alternatives are limited. Yet ancient texts repeatedly return to themes of foul air, unhealthy districts, and social shame connected to certain forms of labor. Waste management also shapes class divisions visibly. The wealthy can pay for private latrines, servants, and cleaner neighborhoods. The poor live closest to overflowing drains and industrial runoff. Sanitation workers themselves often reside near dumping grounds or city edges where odors remain strongest. Geography becomes social hierarchy mapped through smell. Even death intersects with the waste economy. Massive cities generate corpses constantly from disease, accidents, and poverty. Disposal systems for the dead overlap with broader sanitation concerns because bodies decompose rapidly in warm climates. During epidemics or disasters, overwhelmed cities struggle to remove corpses quickly enough. The smell of urban failure becomes unmistakable. Still the labor continues every dawn. Workers lift buckets, carts creak through narrow alleys, drains are cleared. Refuse is hauled beyond walls or sold to farmers. Civilization survives because countless invisible hands move waste away one load at a time. Most ancient monuments still standing today owe part of their existence to those forgotten workers. Without them, the cities behind the monuments could never have endured long enough to become history. The smell of sickness arrives before the symptoms fully reveal themselves. In crowded ancient cities, people notice it instinctively. Air grows heavier in certain districts. Sweet rot drifts from houses where entire families remain behind closed doors. Public spaces fall strangely quiet. Funeral smoke rises more frequently beyond the walls. Markets continue operating because they must. But fear moves invisibly through the crowds, long before microscopes or bacteria enter human understanding. Many ancient societies become convinced that disease travels through corrupted air itself. And in some ways, the cities seem to confirm it. Places that smell worst often do produce the most death. Stagnant canals breed insects. Rotting food contaminates water. Overcrowded housing traps parasites and respiratory illness. Cesspits overflow beneath summer heat. Floods spread sewage through neighborhoods. The sensory link between foul odor and mortality becomes impossible to ignore even if the scientific explanation remains incomplete. Ancient people develop entire systems of belief around dangerous air. Later scholars call this idea miasma theory, the belief that poisonous vapors emerging from decay, swamps, corpses, or filth spread disease. Versions of the concept appear across civilizations. Greek physicians discuss unhealthy atmospheres connected to climate and urban conditions. Roman writers fear marsh air during certain seasons. Chinese medical traditions associate imbalance and corruption in the environment with illness. Medieval societies later inherit many of these assumptions directly from the ancient world. The theory is wrong in detail but often correct in observation. The places producing terrible smells genuinely are dangerous, not because odor itself kills, but because contamination, insects, parasites, and crowding flourish there. Ancient urban populations therefore organize behavior partly around scent. Certain winds feel ominous. Certain districts become feared after sunset. Some neighborhoods gain reputations for sickness lasting generations. The poor suffer first and worst. In cramped apartments, ventilation remains weak. Entire families share confined rooms with smoke from cooking fires, lingering indoors for hours. Waste accumulates nearby because disposal systems favor wealthier districts. Malnutrition weakens resistance to infection. Water sources become unreliable. During outbreaks, crowded housing turns deadly with terrifying speed. Archaeological evidence reveals just how persistent these illnesses are. Excavations of ancient latrines uncover parasite eggs from whipworm, roundworm, and tapeworm preserved for thousands of years. Human skeletons show signs of chronic infection, nutritional stress, and repeated disease exposure. Dental evidence suggests poor health, beginning in childhood for many urban populations. Life expectancy in ancient cities often remains shockingly low by modern standards. Yet epidemics do not feel random to ancient observers. People search constantly for patterns. They notice disease spreads fastest where filth concentrates. They observe that stagnant water and foul smells accompany many outbreaks. Priests perform purification rituals. Officials order street cleaning. Fires burn incense in temples and homes alike. Aromatic substances become associated not only with luxury but protection. During outbreaks, the smell of incense may fill entire districts. In ancient Athens, the devastating plague during the Peloponnesian War overwhelms the city after refugees crowd inside defensive walls. Ancient historian Thucydides describes social collapse, bodies piling near water sources, and desperate attempts to survive amid chaos. Scholars still debate the exact disease involved because the evidence remains incomplete, but the environmental conditions are clear. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, heat, and stress create ideal circumstances for catastrophe. The smell of death becomes impossible to separate from the smell of the city itself. Roman cities face similar dangers repeatedly. Despite aqueducts and drains, population density leaves urban centers vulnerable to outbreaks moving through contaminated water, food supplies, and trade networks. Harbors especially become entry points for disease. Ships carry rats, insects, spoiled cargo, and infected passengers between distant regions faster than ancient societies can respond. Some epidemics reshape entire civilizations. The Antonine Plague spreads through the Roman Empire during the 2nd century CE, likely carried by troops and trade routes connecting crowded cities. Later, the Plague of Cyprian devastates urban populations again during the 3rd century. Ancient descriptions focus heavily on bodily fluids, decay, and overwhelming sensory horror. The sick fill homes and streets simultaneously. Burial systems fail under pressure. Smoke from cremations mingles with sewage and industrial pollution already hanging over major cities. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient populations psychologically endured repeated mass mortality. Religion provides meaning for many. Ritual purification offers a sense of control. Some flee cities if possible. Others remain because survival depends on urban networks of food and employment. And still, through every outbreak, the association between smell and danger deepens further. Sweet perfumes gain spiritual significance partly because they oppose decay. Temples burn fragrant resins believed to purify air corrupted by disease or evil influences. Physicians recommend avoiding stagnant environments and foul districts. Wealthier citizens retreat toward countryside villas during dangerous seasons whenever possible. Rural air becomes associated with moral and physical health. Even cemeteries influence urban smell. Large cities produce constant death even during ordinary times. Burial grounds and cremation sites often sit outside walls, yet winds still carry smoke and decomposition toward populated areas. During epidemics, normal burial practices collapse entirely. Mass graves appear. Bodies remain uncollected in homes. Dogs and scavengers sometimes disturb the dead before removal. Ancient writers occasionally describe these moments with shocking bluntness. The boundary between civilization and collapse suddenly seems fragile. Streets once filled with commerce become lined with corpses. Public fountains stand beside contaminated runoff. Temples overflow with the sick seeking divine protection. And everywhere hangs the smell. Smoke, rot, sweat, waste, infection. Modern science eventually reveals microbes invisible to the human eye, but ancient people already understand something essential through experience alone. Dense cities are dangerous biological environments. Human beings packed together create conditions where illness thrives. Sometimes even the air itself feels hostile. Scholars continue debating how much ancient urban pollution contributed to long-term health decline. Smoke inhalation from indoor fires likely damages lungs across entire populations. Metalworking releases toxic particles into crowded districts. Contaminated water spreads chronic infection continuously, rather than only during major epidemics. The cumulative burden may shape ancient life far more deeply than dramatic plagues alone. Yet cities continue growing. That remains the most extraordinary contradiction of all. Even knowing the risks, people still flood toward urban centers generation after generation. Trade, opportunity, religion, power, and survival outweigh fear. Civilization advances through places that smell increasingly like decay. And for ancient people, foul air becomes more than discomfort. It becomes a warning from the city itself. The smoke never fully clears. From the moment the first fires are lit before dawn until the final embers fade deep into the night, ancient cities breathe through combustion. Wood crackles beneath cooking pots. Charcoal glows inside metal workshops. Bakeries feed furnaces continuously. Potters fire kilns for days at a time. Temples burn incense in thick, fragrant clouds. Blacksmiths hammer iron beside roaring coals, while glassmakers stand before blinding heat. Across the rooftops of the ancient world, thousands upon thousands of separate fires merge into a permanent haze hanging above the streets. Modern people often imagine ancient pollution as primarily biological. Sewage, dung, decay, and rotting food dominate the picture. But ancient cities also choke on smoke. The air itself becomes heavy. In poor districts especially, families cook indoors using open hearths with limited ventilation. Smoke stains walls black over years of use. Soot settles into clothing, bedding, lungs, and skin. Archaeological studies of ancient skeletons suggest many urban residents suffer chronic respiratory damage, likely connected to long-term smoke inhalation. Women and children may experience the worst exposure because they spend more time near domestic fires. The smell differs depending on fuel. Wood smoke carries warmth and familiarity, though in crowded quantities it becomes suffocating. Charcoal burns hotter and cleaner but remains expensive in some regions. Dried animal dung, used widely where timber is scarce, produces its own distinctive odour mixing earth, ash, and organic residue. Peat fires in colder climates generate dense, acrid smoke lingering close to the ground. Industrial workshops introduce sharper chemical smells from melting metal, firing clay, or boiling dyes. Ancient cities therefore develop layered atmospheres changing by district and hour. At sunrise, bakeries dominate the air with hot grain and burning fuel. By midday, industrial smoke thickens near workshops. Evening cooking fires spread across residential quarters simultaneously, creating low clouds trapped between buildings. During winter, colder air holds smoke closer to the streets, while summer heat intensifies every odour already present beneath it. The great cities of antiquity consume astonishing quantities of fuel. Rome alone requires massive shipments of wood and charcoal not only for cooking but heating baths, powering industries, forging tools, baking bread, and supporting military production. Entire forests disappear gradually around expanding urban centres. Ships transport timber across long distances simply to feed urban fires. Scholars still debate the full environmental impact, but deforestation near major cities appears repeatedly in ancient history. And all that fuel eventually becomes smoke. Inside metalworking districts, conditions grow especially brutal. Bronze casting, iron forging, silver refining, and lead smelting release toxic fumes into densely populated neighbourhoods. Workers labour amid heat so intense their skin darkens permanently from soot and ash. Ventilation remains primitive. Sparks drift across crowded wooden buildings, creating constant fire risk. Lead pollution becomes one of the strangest hidden legacies of the ancient world. Roman industry uses enormous quantities of lead for pipes, cookware, cosmetics, pigments, and construction materials. Mining and smelting operations release microscopic particles into air and water systems across large regions. Ice core studies in modern times reveal measurable atmospheric lead pollution during periods of peak Roman industrial activity. Ancient people do not understand the chemical danger. Though some observers notice certain mines and workshops produce chronic illness among labourers, the evidence remains incomplete regarding how much widespread lead exposure affects Roman society overall. Popular claims about lead poisoning destroying the empire are heavily disputed by scholars. Still, no serious doubt remains that ancient industrial cities expose populations to pollutants on significant scale. The smell of these workshops becomes legendary. Tanneries disgust residents with chemical rot. Dye works boil strange mixtures producing metallic and acidic odours. Pottery kilns release heat and ash continuously. Fish sauce factories ferment under the sun beside harbours already thick with sewage and decay. Entire neighbourhoods become associated with smoke so dense that wealthier citizens avoid them whenever possible. Class divisions again appear through air itself. Elite homes sometimes incorporate gardens, courtyards, and better ventilation, reducing direct smoke exposure. Wealthy Romans retreat to countryside villas partly for cleaner air. In imperial China, officials occasionally complain about industrial smoke darkening parts of major capitals. Ancient physicians repeatedly recommend fresh rural environments for health and recovery. The poor remain trapped closest to the fumes. Apartment districts concentrate smoke intensely because buildings crowd together with narrow alleys restricting airflow. Chimneys remain uncommon or inefficient in many periods. Soot accumulates inside lungs year after year. Eye irritation, coughing, and respiratory infections likely become ordinary parts of urban existence. And then there are the fires themselves. Ancient cities burn constantly. Dense wooden construction, open flames, oil lamps, fabric awnings, and industrial furnaces create catastrophic fire hazards. Rome experiences repeated massive fires across its history. The Great Fire during the reign of Nero becomes infamous, partly because crowded urban design allows flames to spread almost uncontrollably. Smoke darkens the sky for days. Burning buildings release horrifying combinations of timber, oil, food stores, sewage, animals, and human bodies into the air. After major fires, the smell lingers long after flames disappear. Wet ash mixes with decomposing remains beneath collapsed structures. Survivors search ruins for salvage while smoke continues rising from buried embers. Entire districts become temporary landscapes of charred debris and exposed sewage lines. Rebuilding begins quickly because cities cannot pause, but the memory of burning remains embedded in urban psychology. Religious smoke adds another dimension entirely. Temples across ancient civilizations burn incense, oils, herbs, and resins during rituals. Frankincense and myrrh become precious partly because they transform atmosphere itself. Sacred spaces smell intentionally different from ordinary streets. Priests understand scent as spiritual technology capable of purification, communication with gods, or protection from corruption. Yet even temple air cannot fully escape the surrounding city. Incense drifts outward into streets already thick with cooking smoke and industrial haze. The sacred and polluted mingle constantly. A worshipper leaving a perfumed sanctuary may step immediately into alleys filled with manure and sewage runoff. This blending of beauty and filth defines ancient urban life repeatedly. Cities smell terrible not because civilization fails, but because civilization concentrates every process sustaining human existence into confined spaces. Fire cooks food, forges tools, heats baths, creates pottery, refines metal, and powers economies. But every flame also consumes oxygen and releases smoke back into crowded air. By nightfall, haze settles low over rooftops. Oil lamps flicker through apartment windows. Kilns continue glowing beyond market districts. Ash drifts softly onto streets where animals sleep beside walls still warm from daytime heat. Somewhere beneath the smoke, millions of lungs continue breathing air already altered by the city. And generation after generation, people learn to call that smell home. Summer transforms the city into something almost biological. Stone walls radiate trapped heat long after sunset. Narrow alleys hold stagnant air between crowded buildings. Refuse left tolerable during cooler months suddenly begins fermenting at astonishing speed. Fish markets sour within hours. Animal carcasses swell beneath clouds of insects. Drains shrink into slow black channels thick with waste and mud. The smell rises everywhere at once, not from one source but from thousands blending together under relentless heat. Ancient people fear certain seasons for good reason. Winter brings hardship, hunger, and smoke-filled interiors, but heat awakens decay itself. In Mediterranean cities, Mesopotamian river settlements, Egyptian urban centres, and tropical trade ports farther east. Warm months magnify every sanitation problem already present throughout the year. Organic matter breaks down faster. Water evaporates from drains, leaving concentrated filth behind. Human bodies sweat continuously inside crowded housing without reliable ventilation. The city begins to rot in public. Modern refrigeration hides much of this reality from contemporary life. Ancient cities possess no such protection. Food preservation depends on salt, smoke, drying, fermentation, or rapid consumption. Once temperatures rise high enough, entire districts must race constantly against spoilage. Meat cannot wait, fish cannot wait, milk cannot wait, even stored grain risks mold. Insects, or damp rot if conditions shift unexpectedly. Flies arrive first. Ancient urban summers belong partly to insects. Swarms gather over dung heaps, butcher stalls, drains, and latrines. Mosquitoes breed in stagnant pools left by leaking canals or poor drainage. Fleas thrive in bedding and animal fur. Lice spread through crowded households where washing clothes frequently requires water and fuel many families cannot spare. The sound itself changes during heat. Buzzing fills market districts. Dogs bark more aggressively around refuse piles. Livestock grow restless under direct sun. Crowded streets become louder and more irritable as tempers shorten beneath oppressive air. Ancient writers often describe summer cities with tones of exhaustion and disgust, though usually without lingering on the sensory detail modern readers might expect. Familiarity perhaps dulls description, yet scattered complaints survive everywhere. Roman poets mock unbearable apartment heat trapped beneath rooftops. Officials issue repeated warnings about waste dumping during dangerous seasons. Physicians recommend avoiding certain districts or stagnant air when temperatures rise. In parts of ancient China and the Middle East, records mention summer epidemics returning with disturbing regularity. Heat exposes how fragile urban systems really are. A drain functioning adequately in cool weather may become intolerable after weeks of heat. Wells drop lower during droughts, concentrating contamination. Water carriers travel farther for reliable supplies. Public fountains attract larger crowds. Animals require more water while simultaneously fouling streets faster. The entire balance of the city strains under environmental pressure. And the smell penetrates everything. Clothing absorbs sweat and smoke. Bedding traps moisture. Food storage jars sour. Leather softens and decays more quickly. Wet wool left unwashed develops overpowering odours. Even wealthier homes struggle against the atmosphere because servants, animals, kitchens, and nearby streets constantly reintroduce smells from outside. For the poor, escape barely exists. In dense apartment blocks, families crowd into single rooms with little airflow. Heat radiates downward from roofs and sideways from neighbouring structures. Chamber pots fill rapidly. Children sleep beside adults and animals. Food spoils quickly if not eaten immediately. During especially severe heat waves, death rates likely rise sharply, though ancient records rarely preserve exact numbers. Archaeological evidence suggests many ancient cities suffer chronic insect infestations difficult to imagine today. Excavations uncover flea remains, parasite eggs, and rat populations embedded deeply within urban layers. Grain warehouses attract rodents continuously. Open drains provide breeding grounds for countless pests. Cats help control some infestations, but never fully. Rats become especially important in crowded heat. They thrive wherever food waste accumulates. Ancient cities unintentionally create perfect rat environments through dense housing, open storage, and unreliable sanitation. Harbours multiply the problem further because ships transport rodents between distant ports. The relationship between rats, fleas, and disease becomes catastrophic centuries later during medieval plague outbreaks. But the ecological foundations already exist in antiquity. The smell of stagnant water may be worst of all. During dry seasons, canals and drains sometimes shrink into slow pools where sewage, animal waste, algae, and industrial runoff collect together beneath direct sun. Ancient observers repeatedly associate these places with sickness and bad air. They avoid them when possible, though poorer residents often cannot choose where they live. Some cities attempt seasonal cleaning campaigns. Workers dredge canals. Streets are washed more aggressively. Refuse removal increases before major festivals or political events. Religious ceremonies invoke purification during dangerous periods, yet population density overwhelms most efforts eventually. No ancient administration possesses the resources or scientific understanding needed to fully control urban contamination on massive scale. Climate shapes everything. cities in cooler northern regions still smell terrible. But heat accelerates biological decay into something more immediate and oppressive. In Egyptian settlements along the Nile, intense sun dries some waste rapidly, while simultaneously magnifying odours from fish, livestock, and human congestion. In Mesopotamian cities, irrigation canals become vulnerable to stagnation and contamination under extreme summer temperatures. Mediterranean port cities combine humidity, fish rot, sewage, and smoke into atmospheres travellers sometimes describe with visible discomfort. Even death behaves differently in heat. Bodies decompose rapidly. Funeral systems face pressure during epidemics or conflict. Cremation smoke mingles with urban haze while burial grounds outside walls struggle to manage increasing numbers of corpses. Ancient people understand the urgency instinctively. The dead must be removed quickly before smell and disease spread further. Still, the city cannot stop. Markets open daily despite the heat. Ships unload cargo. Workshops continue operating beside furnaces already making streets unbearable. Public baths remain crowded because people seek relief and cleanliness simultaneously. Political speeches continue in forums. Priests maintain rituals. Life pushes forward through air thick with sweat, smoke, insects, sewage, and decay. This persistence may be the defining quality of ancient urban civilization. The city survives not because conditions are comfortable, but because millions of people learn to endure discomfort collectively. Human beings adapt to environments modern societies would consider almost unlivable. They build routines inside heat and smell until both become ordinary parts of existence. And sometimes, late at night after temperatures finally begin falling, a faint breeze moves through the streets carrying mixed traces of ash, river water, dung, sea salt, spices, and smoke. The entire civilization breathes out at once. Against the smell of the city, ancient people wage a quiet war with fragrance. The effort appears everywhere. Sweet smoke rising from temple altars, oils rubbed into skin after bathing, herbs scattered across floors, flowers hanging inside wealthy homes before wilting under the heat, resin burned during funerals, perfumed wax melted beside dinner gatherings, aromatic woods carried across deserts and oceans at enormous expense, simply so their scent can briefly overpower the odour of urban life. Perfume in the ancient world is not merely luxury. It is protection, status, medicine, ritual, and psychological escape all at once. In crowded cities where sewage flows through streets and smoke stains the air daily, fragrance becomes deeply tied to ideas of purity. Sweet scents suggest order pushing back against decay. Foul odours imply corruption, disease, poverty, or divine displeasure. Ancient religions absorb this sensory distinction into ritual practice so thoroughly that temples across civilizations become islands of controlled smell within otherwise contaminated urban landscapes. Walking toward a temple often means sensing it before seeing it. Frankincense drifts above rooftops in sacred districts. Myrrh burns slowly inside enclosed chambers. Cedar smoke curls around statues of gods. Priests wash bodies and garments repeatedly before ceremonies. Floors are cleaned more carefully than ordinary streets nearby. Water basins allow ritual purification at entrances. The contrast matters psychologically as much as spiritually. Worshippers step temporarily out of the city's biological chaos into a carefully managed atmosphere. Ancient Egypt elevates this relationship between scent and holiness to extraordinary levels. Perfumed oils hold religious significance connected to preservation, divine favour, and bodily care. Temples burn incense imported through long-distance trade routes stretching deep into Arabia and East Africa. Elite Egyptians wear scented cones of wax and perfume during banquets, slowly melting under body heat throughout the evening. Scholars still debate exactly how widespread some of these practices are, but surviving art and texts suggest fragrance plays a major role in elite sensory life. Yet even the most elaborate perfumes cannot fully erase the surrounding environment. Outside temple walls, markets still rot beneath the sun, animals crowd streets, drains overflow, river mud mixes with waste. The sacred aroma exists beside ordinary urban smell rather than replacing it. In Rome, bathing culture becomes another major defense against filth. Public baths offer warmth, social contact, exercise, and temporary cleanliness within overcrowded urban life. After sweating in heated rooms, bathers scrape oil and dirt from their skin using curved tools called strigils. Perfumed oils are then applied afterward. Wealthy Romans spend significant fortunes importing exotic fragrances from across the empire. Cinnamon, rose oil, saffron, and incense become symbols not only of wealth, but refinement itself. To smell pleasant inside the ancient city is a form of power. The poor often cannot afford regular bathing supplies, perfumes, or clean clothing. Their labour places them closest to smoke, sewage, industrial runoff, and animals. Elite fragrance therefore becomes social separation made physical. A senator entering a forum surrounded by perfume announces status before speaking a single word. Still, ancient authors frequently mock excessive fragrance too. Roman satirists joke about men drowning themselves in imported oils while streets outside remain filthy. Philosophers criticize luxury and artificial scents as signs of moral weakness. Some writers associate heavy perfume with decadence, softness, or foreign excess. The tension reveals a deeper contradiction. Civilization craves pleasant smells while simultaneously generating endless foul ones. Medicine also becomes entangled with fragrance. Ancient physicians recommend aromatic herbs and resins against bad air believed to spread illness. During outbreaks, people carry flowers or scented cloths near their faces. Temples burn incense more intensely. Wealthy homes fill rooms with perfumes during dangerous seasons. Though the scientific reasoning remains flawed, some substances may accidentally repel insects or partially mask contamination. No single explanation fully accounts for how much psychological comfort these rituals provide, but the effect is likely significant. Smell shapes emotion powerfully. A brief escape from sewage and smoke may feel almost transformative inside dense cities. Bathhouses therefore become more than hygienic spaces. They are emotional relief. Temples offer not only spiritual refuge but sensory refuge. Gardens inside elite villas create controlled environments where flowers, water, and fresh air oppose the overwhelming density outside. Nature itself becomes a luxury inside large cities. Urban elites cultivate roses, lilies, lavender, mint, and other aromatic plants partly because greenery softens the sensory violence of crowded streets. Fountains cool air, courtyards improve circulation. Perfumed banquets attempt to overwhelm unpleasant smells through sheer intensity of aroma. But underneath everything remains the city. Guests arriving at elegant dinners still travel through filthy roads to get there. Servants handling perfumes also clean latrines and dispose of garbage. Incense drifting through palace halls mingles faintly with smoke from nearby workshops and kitchens. Even emperors cannot completely isolate themselves from urban reality. Some ancient societies push fragrance into funerary rituals as well. Bodies decompose rapidly in warm climates, especially during epidemics or long ceremonies. Aromatic oils help slow odor temporarily, while also symbolizing respect for the dead. Egyptian embalming becomes deeply connected to perfume and resin. Roman funerals burn incense heavily during processions. Sweet smoke accompanies death everywhere because civilization fears decomposition, not only physically, but spiritually. And still the smell of the city persists beneath every attempt to conceal it. Archaeologists today uncover perfume containers, incense burners, oil flasks, cosmetic tools, and bath complexes across the ancient world. These objects reveal how intensely people pursue fragrance despite difficult living conditions. Entire trade networks develop around transporting aromatic materials thousands of kilometers across deserts and oceans. That fact alone says something profound. Human beings living inside crowded ancient cities are not indifferent to smell. Quite the opposite. They become obsessed with controlling it whenever possible. Cleanliness, perfume, incense, flowers, and scented oils matter precisely because the surrounding environment constantly threatens to overwhelm the senses. Perhaps that is why ancient fragrance often carries spiritual meaning. Sweet scent represents something fragile and temporary pushing back against decay. A brief moment where the body, the home, or the temple feels purified despite the city pressing endlessly outside. At night, incense smoke rises softly through dark streets already carrying odours of sewage, sweat, wet stone, and ash. For a few moments the sweetness hangs in the air. Then the city swallows it again. Behind palace walls, the smell still finds its way inside. The ancient world remembers kings and emperors through polished images of luxury. Marble halls shimmer beneath torchlight. Silk garments rustle through painted corridors. Perfumed servants move quietly beside fountains and gardens. Banquets overflow with exotic foods carried from distant provinces. Modern imagination often treats royal courts as spaces somehow lifted above the filth consuming ordinary cities. But no palace truly escapes the city surrounding it. Even the wealthiest rulers in history live inside biological worlds governed by the same basic realities as everyone else. Water stagnates, food spoils, animals defecate, bodies sweat, waste accumulates. In fact, palaces sometimes intensify these problems because they concentrate enormous numbers of servants, guards, cooks, animals, guests, and ceremonial activities within enclosed spaces designed more for power than sanitation. The illusion of separation matters politically. Rulers must appear clean, orderly, and almost sacred compared to the crowded populations outside their gates. Palaces therefore invest heavily in sensory control. Floors are washed repeatedly, incense burns constantly, gardens soften the air with flowers and moisture. Imported perfumes mask unpleasant odours drifting inward from kitchens, stables, or nearby streets. Yet beneath the perfumes, the machinery of court life generates astonishing amounts of waste. Royal kitchens alone become industrial systems. Massive fires burn continuously preparing meals for nobles, officials, soldiers, and servants. Fish, meat, fruit, grain, wine, oils, and spices arrive daily in huge quantities. Scraps pile rapidly. Animal blood drains from slaughter areas hidden behind ceremonial courtyards. Ash accumulates beside ovens. Water grows foul after repeated use in crowded kitchens lacking modern drainage. The smell changes depending on where one stands. Near banquet halls, the air may carry roasted meat, wine, beeswax, and incense. A short distance away, servants empty chamber pots into drainage channels, while stable workers shovel manure from royal horses. Kitchens release grease and smoke into narrow service passages invisible to honoured guests. The palace divides smell according to hierarchy. The wealthy breathe different air whenever possible. In the imperial palaces of ancient Constantinople, elaborate ceremonial spaces attempt to project heavenly order at the center of empire. Water features cool courtyards, silk hangings soften interiors, religious rituals saturate chapels with incense. Yet the capital outside remains a crowded urban environment filled with sewage, harbour smells, smoke, and industrial districts. Wind does not respect social class. Odours drift across walls regardless of imperial authority. The same contradiction appears in imperial China. Forbidden compounds isolate rulers physically from ordinary populations, but vast palace complexes require thousands of workers and immense logistical systems. Kitchens, laundries, workshops, storage facilities, stables, and servant quarters operate constantly behind ceremonial facades. Waste removal becomes a massive hidden operation. Historical records mention repeated concerns about drainage, stagnant water, and sanitation inside or near palace districts. The evidence remains incomplete because elite chroniclers rarely dwell on unpleasant sensory details unless conditions become impossible to ignore. Yet scattered references survive. Complaints about summer odours, flooded palace drains, overwhelming smoke from ceremonial burnings, insect infestations during heat, food spoilage during shortages or transport delays. Even sacred spaces struggle constantly against decay. Temples stand at the centre of many ancient cities not only spiritually but physically. Pilgrims crowd entrances. Animals are sacrificed in enormous numbers during festivals. Food offerings accumulate beneath heat. Smoke from incense and burnt offerings thickens enclosed courtyards. Priests wash altars repeatedly while blood drains through stone channels into disposal systems below. Ancient religious rituals often involve death directly. At temples across the Mediterranean and Near East, sacrificial animals are slaughtered publicly before crowds. The smell combines fresh blood, burning fat, smoke, sweat, and packed humanity. During major festivals, thousands gather inside confined spaces carrying animals, food, and waste together into already overcrowded urban centres. And still these places are considered holy. That paradox reveals how differently ancient societies experience smell compared to modern expectations. Sacredness does not require sterile environments. Instead, holiness often emerges through transformation. Incense purifies sacrificial smoke. Ritual washing opposes ordinary contamination. Perfumed oils separate priests or rulers from common labour. Cleanliness becomes symbolic rather than absolute. Royal gardens play another important role. In hot, crowded cities, cultivated green spaces offer sensory relief almost beyond price. Trees provide shade. Water cools the air. Flowers introduce controlled fragrance. Birds and flowing fountains soften urban noise. Ancient rulers build gardens partly for prestige, but also because nature becomes psychologically restorative inside polluted cities. The hanging gardens associated with Babylon, whether legendary or partly historical, reflect this longing clearly. The image of elevated greenery rising above dusty urban landscapes captures something deeply human. Civilization creates density and power, then dreams constantly of escaping its own atmosphere. Servants experience the palace differently from rulers. Those working behind ceremonial spaces confront the hidden biological reality directly. They clean waste channels, carry water, scrub floors, remove spoiled food, tend animals, and wash clothing saturated with sweat and smoke. Their labour allows elites to maintain the illusion of refinement. Without servants, most royal environments would become unbearable within days. Ancient palaces therefore depend on invisible sanitation systems powered not by machines but by human bodies. slaves, laborers, servants, and attendants move endlessly through corridors carrying water in one direction and waste in the other. Disease penetrates palaces too. Wealth provides some protection through better food, larger living spaces, and cleaner water access. But epidemics repeatedly reach royal courts regardless. Rats do not recognize class. Mosquitoes ignore imperial authority. Contaminated water flows beneath rich and poor districts alike during floods or infrastructure failure. Some rulers become obsessed with purity as a result. Bathing rituals grow elaborate. Clothing changes frequently. Perfumes intensify during outbreaks. Religious purification ceremonies multiply during times of disease or political crisis. Yet no amount of incense fully removes the reality waiting beyond palace gates. At night, after ceremonies end and banquet halls empty, servants continue cleaning by torchlight. Food scraps are removed, ashes shoveled from ovens. Chamber pots are carried through dark corridors toward disposal pits outside the walls. Stable workers calm restless horses standing in a straw already damp with urine. Beyond the palace, the city still breathes in smoke and sewage beneath the darkness. And somewhere between the perfume of emperors and the labour of servants lies the true smell of ancient power. Sometimes the city loses control completely. For years or even centuries, ancient urban life balances on fragile systems held together through labour, routine, and constant improvisation. Waste is removed just quickly enough. Water still flows, markets still function. Corpses are buried before decay overwhelms the streets. The smell remains terrible but familiar, woven into ordinary existence. Then something shifts. A flood arrives. A drought deepens. An army surrounds the walls. Disease spreads faster than usual. Suddenly the mechanisms keeping civilization barely stable begin collapsing all at once, and the city becomes a death trap. The transformation can happen frighteningly fast. In crowded ancient settlements, sanitation systems possess little margin for failure. A blocked drain, contaminated well, delayed grain shipment, or burst canal may trigger cascading consequences across entire neighborhoods. Food spoils, water stagnates, animals die. Human waste accumulates faster than workers can remove it. Insects multiply. Fear spreads alongside the smell. Sieges reveal this vulnerability more clearly than almost any other event. When armies surround ancient cities, populations often swell as refugees flee behind defensive walls seeking protection. Food supplies tighten immediately. Livestock crowd into confined spaces. Water sources become strategic targets. Garbage removal slows or stops entirely because leaving the walls becomes too dangerous. Latrines overflow. Corpses accumulate after fighting or disease outbreaks. Ancient historians repeatedly describe siege cities descending into unbearable conditions long before surrender. During the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, famine, overcrowding, disease, and death devastate the population trapped inside the city walls. Ancient accounts describe bodies piling in streets and burial systems collapsing under pressure. Scholars debate some details in surviving narratives, but the broader reality is clear. Dense urban environments become catastrophically unstable when supply systems fail. The smell during sieges must have been overwhelming beyond modern comprehension. Smoke from fires mixes with human waste, blood, unwashed bodies, dead animals, and decomposing corpses trapped inside crowded defensive spaces. Water contamination spreads quickly. People weaken from hunger and illness simultaneously. Even victorious armies often hesitate before entering fallen cities because disease threatens attackers as much as defenders. Floods produce different but equally destructive forms of collapse. Many ancient cities grow beside rivers because water and trade are essential for survival. Yet rivers eventually reclaim those same settlements with terrifying force. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and along Mediterranean coastlines, floods repeatedly overwhelm drainage systems carrying sewage, corpses, industrial waste, and animal remains through densely populated districts. After floodwaters retreat, thick layers of contaminated mud remain. Homes collapse under moisture damage, wells become polluted, food stores rot, mosquitoes breed in stagnant pools left behind. Ancient administrators organize cleanup efforts when possible, but large disasters often exceed available labor and resources. Disease outbreaks commonly follow major flooding events, reinforcing ancient beliefs linking bad air and sickness. The Great Plague outbreaks of history reveal how quickly urban order can unravel. The plague of Justinian during the 6th century strikes cities across the eastern Mediterranean with devastating force. Constantinople, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, reportedly struggles to remove corpses fast enough as death rates soar. Ancient chroniclers describe overwhelmed burial systems, labor shortages, and entire districts transformed by decay. Modern scholars debate exact mortality numbers because ancient accounts often exaggerate catastrophe. The evidence remains incomplete, yet archaeological and historical data strongly support severe urban disruption on an enormous scale. And always the smell returns in the descriptions. Rotting bodies, smoke from mass cremations, filthy streets abandoned by normal sanitation workers who themselves fall sick or flee. Harbours clogged with neglected cargo. Animals wandering through emptied neighbourhoods feeding on refuse and the dead alike. Civilization reveals how thin its protective layers truly are. Even advanced cities depend on constant maintenance by thousands of ordinary workers. Remove enough labourers through war, famine, or disease, and infrastructure begins failing almost immediately. Drains clog, water systems break, markets empty, waste accumulates. Ancient urban life is less stable than its monumental architecture suggests. Climate can intensify collapse further. Periods of drought shrink rivers and reduce fresh water access while concentrating pollution in remaining sources. Crop failures drive migration toward already crowded cities. Malnourished populations become more vulnerable to disease. Heat accelerates decomposition. Political instability weakens administrative response precisely when coordination matters most. No single explanation fully accounts for why some ancient cities recover after catastrophe, while others decline permanently. Geography matters, trade routes shift, political systems fragment, environmental damage accumulates slowly over generations. But sanitation failure often appears somewhere in the chain of urban decline. Even Rome experiences this gradually. As imperial systems weaken in the Western Empire, maintaining aqueducts, drains, roads, and public services becomes increasingly difficult. Population changes alter how infrastructure functions. Some districts empty, while others decay. Waste removal becomes less organized. Public baths close or deteriorate. Ancient urban density that once seemed almost miraculous begins working against the city itself. The smell of abandonment differs from the smell of prosperity. Active cities smell of markets, smoke, sweat, cooking fires, and crowded humanity. Declining cities acquire heavier notes of stagnant water, collapsing buildings, neglected waste, and empty spaces where maintenance no longer happens regularly. Nature begins reclaiming urban ground. Rats and insects flourish in abandoned structures. Canals silt up. Refuse layers deepen. Archaeologists today often uncover these transitions physically preserved in soil. A functioning drain suddenly fills with garbage instead of flowing water. Market districts shrink. Maintenance layers disappear from streets. Industrial waste accumulates unchecked. Human remains appear in unusual burial contexts suggesting crisis conditions. The city's decline becomes visible not only through monuments, but through sanitation failure embedded underground. Yet collapse is rarely absolute. Even devastated cities continue containing survivors adapting to worsening conditions. People salvage materials from ruined buildings. Informal markets emerge beside abandoned infrastructure. Wells are reused despite contamination risks. Human beings remain astonishingly resilient inside environments modern societies would consider impossible. Perhaps that resilience explains why ancient cities endure as long as they do despite everything working against them. But when urban systems finally fail beyond repair, the smell becomes part of the memory. Smoke over ruined districts, mud thick with sewage after floods, sweet decay drifting through empty streets where crowds once gathered, the air itself announcing that civilization has lost its struggle to contain the consequences of its own density. And long after the people disappear, traces of that struggle remain buried beneath the earth. For thousands of years, the smell disappears. The cities collapse, burn, flood, or slowly empty. Roofs cave inward, drains clog with silt. Markets vanish beneath layers of dust and rubble. Rain washes through abandoned streets where sewage once flowed. Plants break apart stone foundations. Generations pass. Then centuries. Eventually the odours that once defined daily life fade completely from the landscape, leaving behind silent ruins that seem strangely clean. Modern archaeology arrives long after the smell is gone. Yet buried beneath the earth, traces remain. Ancient cities preserve themselves in unexpected ways. Human waste hardens inside drains and cesspits. Parasite eggs survive in ancient latrines. Chemical residues sink into soil beneath workshops and slaughter areas. Ash layers trap microscopic evidence of smoke and fuel use. Animal bones accumulate in disposal pits. Even hardened plaque on human teeth preserves fragments of ancient environments. The modern reconstruction of ancient smell begins with fragments no one once considered important. Early archaeologists often focus mainly on monuments, statues, inscriptions, and elite architecture. Temples and palaces dominate attention because they appear visually dramatic. But over time, researchers realize the true texture of ancient urban life hides elsewhere inside drains, garbage pits, sewers, kitchens, workshops, and ordinary homes. The archaeology of filth becomes one of the most revealing tools for understanding civilization. Excavations at sites like Pompeii preserve entire urban systems frozen in time beneath volcanic ash. Streets still contain traces of cart traffic worn into stone. Drains reveal patterns of waste disposal. Food residues survive inside containers. Animal bones expose dietary habits. Latrines preserve parasite evidence showing chronic intestinal infections among residents. Even the walls remember smoke. Inside ancient homes, archaeologists identify blackened ceilings and soot deposits from centuries of indoor fire use. Microscopic particles embedded in plaster reveal long-term air pollution exposure. In some settlements, respiratory damage visible in human skeletons aligns with evidence of heavy smoke inhalation inside poorly ventilated structures. The city begins speaking again through chemistry. Modern techniques allow researchers to analyze soil for traces of urine, feces, blood, fats, oils, and industrial byproducts. Ancient tanneries leave distinct chemical signatures behind. Slaughterhouses reveal concentrated animal waste and bone deposits. Fish processing districts contain residues from fermented sources and decayed marine products. What once assaulted the senses now survives as molecular evidence beneath the ground. Scholars reconstruct forgotten sensory landscapes piece by piece. At Herculaneum, preserved wooden structures and organic materials offer rare insight into daily Roman life. Excavations uncover drains packed with food scraps, sewage remnants, and household waste. Analysis of ancient garbage reveals surprising details about diet, trade, and sanitation habits. Researchers even identify which fish species Romans commonly fermented into sauce based on residue trapped inside containers. The evidence remains incomplete, but patterns emerge clearly across civilizations. Ancient cities are almost always dirtier, smokier, noisier, and biologically denser than earlier generations of historians imagine. Romantic paintings of clean marble capitals fade under archaeological reality. White Roman statues once stand amid crowded streets stained with smoke and waste. Egyptian ceremonial avenues coexist beside dense districts filled with livestock and refuse. Mesopotamian canals carry irrigation water and contamination simultaneously. Parasites tell some of the most disturbing stories. Ancient latrines preserve eggs from worms capable of infecting human intestines for years at a time. Archaeologists recover evidence of roundworm, whipworm, tapeworm, and other parasites across urban sites from Europe to Asia. Some Roman sanitation systems surprisingly fail to reduce parasite transmission significantly despite advanced engineering. This discovery shocks many researchers initially. Bathhouses, aqueducts, and drains create the image of Roman hygiene, yet the persistence of parasites suggests sanitation remains incomplete. Shared bathing water, contaminated food, insects, and densely packed populations continue spreading infection even in sophisticated cities. Archaeology also reveals how much effort ancient societies invest in controlling smell itself. Perfume containers appear across elite households and tombs. Incense burners survive in temples and domestic shrines. Drainage systems evolve repeatedly through trial and error. Public toilets grow larger and more organized in expanding cities. Waste pits are relocated farther from wealthy districts whenever possible. Civilization spends enormous energy fighting its own byproducts. Sometimes archaeologists can identify moments of crisis directly through sanitation collapse. Drains suddenly clog with garbage instead of flowing water. Emergency burials appear during epidemics. Animal carcasses accumulate unusually in disposal pits. Flood deposits carry mixed layers of sewage, ash, and debris through urban neighborhoods. The smell of catastrophe becomes visible underground. One of the strangest challenges for archaeologists is interpreting absence. Cleanliness rarely survives clearly in the record because clean spaces leave fewer traces behind. Filth preserves itself more easily. Garbage accumulates, waste hardens, ash settles into layers. Ancient cities therefore often appear through what they throw away rather than what they celebrate. Modern excavators sometimes describe opening sealed drains or cesspits, and encountering lingering odours even after thousands of years. Organic residues trapped in oxygen-poor conditions can survive astonishingly well. In rare cases, archaeologists identify preserved fecal matter, food remains, and decomposed biological material almost intact. For a brief moment, the ancient city breathes again. These discoveries reshape understanding not only of sanitation, but of human experience itself. History stops feeling abstract. The past becomes physical. Ancient people are no longer distant figures moving silently through clean ruins. They become bodies navigating smoke-filled streets, contaminated water, crowded markets, insects, waste, and overwhelming smell every day of their lives. And yet they build civilizations that endure millennia. That contradiction fascinates archaeologists endlessly. Human beings create philosophy, mathematics, literature, religion, monumental architecture, and global trade networks while living inside environments modern societies would consider unbearable. The evidence buried beneath cities reveals both extraordinary ingenuity and constant biological struggle. Perhaps that is why ancient ruins feel so haunting today. Modern visitors walk through silent streets at Pompeii or stand beside broken sewers beneath Rome without sensing the overwhelming atmosphere those places once carried. The smell is missing, and without it something essential disappears too. The ruins appear calmer, cleaner, and more distant than they truly were. But beneath the stones, archaeology keeps uncovering reminders. Civilization did not rise from spotless marble. It rose from mud, smoke, blood, sewage, ash, and the endless labor of people struggling to survive inside cities that smelled far worse than most modern minds can comfortably imagine. The modern city still carries ancient echoes, even when people no longer notice them. Beneath asphalt roads and illuminated towers, enormous systems move constantly out of sight. Sewage tunnels carry waste away within seconds. Water treatment plants filter contamination before it reaches homes. Garbage trucks remove refuse before rot settles into the streets. Refrigeration slows decay. Ventilation clears smoke from buildings. Chemical disinfectants suppress insects and bacteria before outbreaks begin. Most people in industrialized societies wake each morning inside cities that have quietly solved problems ancient civilizations endure for thousands of years. And because these systems remain mostly invisible, modern populations often forget how fragile they are. The smell disappears first. A modern apartment building housing hundreds of people may contain fewer noticeable odors than a single crowded Roman insula. Fresh water arrives instantly. Toilets flush waste underground. Food preservation keeps markets from collapsing into rot by midday. Livestock remain physically separated from dense residential districts. Industrial smoke is pushed away or filtered through regulations unimaginable in the ancient world. Yet the basic challenge never truly vanishes. Human beings still produce enormous quantities of waste every day. Cities still depend on constant maintenance by hidden labor systems. Water contamination still threatens urban populations whenever infrastructure fails. Flood still overwhelms sewage networks. Heat still intensifies decay. Rats and insects still thrive wherever sanitation weakens. The ancient struggle against smell has not ended. It has merely moved underground. Sometimes the illusion breaks suddenly. Modern disasters briefly expose how close contemporary cities remain to ancient conditions. After hurricanes, earthquakes, wars, or infrastructure collapse, sewage backs into streets within hours, garbage accumulates, water becomes unsafe, heat accelerates decomposition, disease risk rises sharply, entire neighborhoods begin smelling different almost immediately. The transformation feels shocking precisely because modern people are unaccustomed to it. Ancient urban populations never possessed the luxury of forgetting biological reality. Modern societies do. In rapidly growing megacities across the developing world, some ancient patterns remain disturbingly familiar. Informal settlements lacking sewage systems struggle with contaminated water and waste accumulation. Open drains carry refuse through crowded neighborhoods. Heat and overcrowding intensify disease risks. Smoke from cooking fires still damages lungs inside poorly ventilated homes. The technologies may differ, but the underlying pressures resemble challenges faced by cities thousands of years ago. Scholars studying urban history increasingly argue that sanitation may be one of humanity's greatest unnoticed achievements. Empires rise and fall dramatically. Monuments inspire awe. Wars dominate textbooks. Yet few developments transform ordinary human life more completely than reliable sewage removal and clean water systems. The disappearance of constant urban smell marks a civilizational shift almost as important as agriculture itself. Ancient people would likely find many modern cities uncanny, not because of skyscrapers or electricity, but because the air itself feels strangely empty. Streets no longer steam with animal waste. Markets rarely smell of blood and rot. Water can often be trusted without fear. Indoor smoke no longer stains every ceiling black. Entire populations move through dense urban environments without constant sensory reminders of decay. That absence changes psychology profoundly. Modern urban life allows people to ignore many processes sustaining civilization. Food arrives packaged and cold. Waste vanishes with a flush or disappears into sealed containers. Death itself becomes hidden inside hospitals, morgues, and funeral industries separated from daily public life. Ancient cities expose these realities openly every day. And yet modern cities generate their own forms of pollution. Industrial chemicals replace some ancient toxins. Vehicle exhaust substitutes for wood smoke. Landfills grow beyond city edges out of sight rather than inside streets. Rivers remain vulnerable to contamination whenever regulations weaken. Air pollution still kills millions worldwide through particles invisible compared to the thick smoke of antiquity. No single explanation fully accounts for why modern societies associate ancient cities so strongly with grandeur, while forgetting their sensory brutality. Ruins encourage idealization. Smell cannot survive in marble fragments or museum displays. Tourists walk through ancient forums under clean open skies rather than through crowded streets layered with sewage and manure. History becomes easier to admire once the odor disappears, but recovering that missing sensory world matters because it changes understanding of civilization itself. Ancient achievements become more impressive, not less, when placed inside their true environments. Philosophers debate ethics beside polluted rivers. Engineers construct aqueducts while fighting endless sanitation failures. Merchants build global trade networks through harbours thick with decay and disease. Human beings create beauty without waiting for perfect conditions. Perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden beneath the smell of ancient cities. Civilization has always been both magnificent and fragile at the same time. Every crowded settlement represents a constant negotiation between order and biological chaos. Ancient urban life simply reveals the struggle more openly than modern infrastructure allows people to see, and traces of that older world still linger quietly around us. The faint smell rising from subway tunnels after rain, garbage waiting in summer heat behind restaurants, smoke drifting over dense neighborhoods during power outages, flood water carrying sewage through streets after storms. For brief moments, modern cities remember what cities once were all the time. Beneath every polished capital lies the same ancient truth. Human beings gather together seeking safety, trade, knowledge, power, and belonging. But whenever enough people share one space, the city begins producing its own atmosphere. Heat, waste, smoke, water, animals, food, labor, and death all merge into something uniquely urban. Ancient civilizations simply lived closer to that reality. Their cities smelled terrible, not because they failed to build civilization, but because civilization itself was still young, crowded, improvised, and intensely physical. The streets of Rome, Babylon, Alexandria, and countless forgotten cities carried the odor of humanity learning, often painfully, how to live together in numbers large enough to change the earth itself. And for thousands of years, the smell followed wherever the city grew. The night grows quieter at last. Somewhere beyond the walls of an ancient city, the wind moves through empty fields carrying cleaner air across darkened roads. The stars remain untouched above the smoke. Rivers continue flowing slowly past sleeping harbours and silent temples. Yet inside the city itself, even after midnight, the traces linger. Ash cooling inside ovens, damp stone beside drains, faint sewage beneath the streets, animals shifting in their sleep, rot hidden beneath market stalls waiting for dawn. For most of human history, this is simply what civilization smells like. The modern world often remembers ancient cities through silence. Ruins stand beneath open skies with no crowds pressing through the gates, no animals choking the roads, no smoke trapped between buildings. Visitors walk across polished museum floors or stand among broken columns imagining philosophy, empire, religion, and beauty. But the real cities are never silent and never clean. They breathe constantly, they sweat, they decay. And somehow, despite all of it, they endure long enough to reshape the world. That may be the strangest part of the story. Human beings do not wait for perfect conditions before building civilization. They build inside mud, smoke, waste, insects, disease, overcrowding, and unbearable heat. They create poetry beside polluted rivers. They invent mathematics in cities thick with sewage. They construct temples smelling of incense while refuse rots outside the gates. The contradiction never disappears. Every civilization balances elegance against decay. Beneath marble floors lie drains. Beneath perfumes lies sweat. Beneath monumental architecture lies the endless labour of carrying water in and waste out. Ancient people understand this far more intimately than most modern societies do, because the systems sustaining urban life remain visible around them every day. Perhaps that visibility changes the way they think about existence itself. The ancient city constantly reminds its inhabitants that human life is physical and temporary. Food spoils quickly, bodies weaken, heat transforms flesh into decay within days. Rivers meant to sustain life can also spread sickness. Entire populations depend on invisible balances they barely understand. The smell in the streets is not merely unpleasant. It is a warning that civilization itself remains fragile. And yet the cities continue growing. Generation after generation, people still move toward crowded walls and noisy markets because the city offers something stronger than discomfort: opportunity, protection, belonging, meaning, even in terrible conditions. Urban life connects human beings together in ways no isolated village can fully match. Ideas spread faster, trade expands farther, cultures collide and transform one another. The city becomes the engine of history despite the smell, or perhaps partly because of the intense human closeness creating it. Over centuries, sanitation slowly improves, drains deepen, water systems expand, waste removal becomes more organized, but the deeper transformation arrives much later, when modern infrastructure finally hides the biological machinery of urban life beneath streets and behind walls. The smell fades from daily awareness, and with it disappears a constant sensory reminder of what cities truly are. Still, the ancient world is never entirely gone. After heavy rain in modern capitals, sewage sometimes rises briefly through storm drains. During heat waves, garbage and river water can still turn sour beneath concrete. In moments of blackout, flood, or disaster, cities rapidly reveal how dependent they remain on hidden systems working without pause. Beneath the polished surface of modern life waits the same ancient vulnerability. The old cities understood that vulnerability intimately. Perhaps that is why their ruins feel so haunting now. Standing in places like Pompeii or the broken streets of Rome, modern visitors sense the distance between worlds without always knowing why. The missing smell creates part of that distance. The ruins feel cleaner than they ever truly were. Time has washed away the smoke, the sewage, the blood, the animals, the stagnant canals, and the crowded heat. What remains is stone. But once these places lived. Children ran through alleys carrying water jars, bakers lit fires before sunrise, labourers cleaned drains while incense drifted from nearby temples, merchants shouted over flies and livestock, crowded apartments trapped summer heat late into the night. Somewhere, always, smoke rose into the sky. And beneath it all moved the great human experiment of civilization itself, imperfect, dirty, loud, exhausting, brilliant. The ancient cities smelled terrible because they were full of life.